See me okay?
Perfectly.
Good, okay. How you doing?
Very well, very well. I was thinking you must have had a late night.
No, what happened was I was running a little late. I had to walk my dog. You have dogs, so you understand what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
It was something I had to do, so I was running a little late. You didn't get I sent you an email, though, right before saying to move it to 4:30. You didn't get that one?
Oh, no, I didn't know. I didn't know. I just know that you're quite nocturnal, so I thought
Yeah,
you are, aren't you?
very much so.
Yeah, because whenever we book our calls, it's always, we live in the same area, so it's always around 4 p.m., which is sort of the end of my work there, toward the end.
Yeah.
Whereas I think you're waking up sort of around 2 or 1.
Yeah, that's true. Well, I stay up most of the time till 6 a.m. So, yeah.
So you've defied the odds, living a very healthy life into older age and living completely nocturnally.
But it's not good. I'll be honest with you. It's kind of like I got into a bad habit. You know, I started where I used to go to sleep at normal times, get up earlier, and then over the years I gradually got, started staying up later and later and later. Then I started my schedule changed where I started training at night. That's when it really got late. Because when I was training at Gold's, I'd get to the gym at 10:30 at night, finish at 12 midnight, and then you eat something and, your brain is stimulated. So, you can't fall asleep. But no matter what you do, you could take 40 sleeping pills, you're still going to be awake. Okay. So, then I started going to sleep at 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m. Now it's either 5 or 6 a.m. It's terrible. I hate it, to be honest with you.
Do you notice as you get older that the time period that you sleep in sort of gets more rigid so that it becomes more hard to change it?
Yes. Not only that, but the sleep. I've read this for years. Now, I've been diagnosed with sleep apnea. I just got a CPAP. I'm getting a CPAP device.
Okay.
But even before that, I've noticed that I've read for years that older people have very disordered sleep very often. In other words, they'll get up a lot. Sometimes it's a prostate problem in men or bladder problems or whatever. But even if it isn't those things, they tend to not sleep. They have a problem getting to the deep stages. Mm-hmm. In recent years, I know you follow the research. You must know it's very scary because getting disordered sleep is associated with an increase of tau in the brain. TAO, you know what that is, right? Yeah. That's one of the two proteins involved in that just causes the neurofibrillary tangles that are involved in that. That's very scary to me. One night of bad sleep increases tau by something like 15%. When I read that, I got scared to death, to be honest with you.
But it's also involved in the amyloid plaque pathogenesis.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. Well, I try and do the rest of my life where I do everything to combat that. In other words, I took supplements, I exercise, do this and that. I'm hoping, and I don't have, my mother had vascular dementia, not Alzheimer's. My father had no dementia whatsoever. He died of diabetic complications. But I'm hoping that, I'm trying to get better sleep. And I'm trying to, again, I take supplements that hopefully will reduce the burden on my brain of amyloid and tau, because I don't want to get, that to me is my biggest fear of getting dementia.
What I have noticed personally in my experiments on myself is that the supplements that increase GABAergic signaling tend to increase deep sleep, whereas the supplements that increase cholinergic signaling tend to increase REM sleep.
Yeah.
And then melatonin seems to also increase REM sleep.
I think you're right about that. And, it's funny. A lot of people don't realize how melatonin works. Do you know the actual mechanism, why it helps you sleep?
Well, it signals to the melatonin receptors.
Not just that, but it lowers body temperature. In other words,
it lowers, exactly, yeah.
Signal the onset of sleep, your body temperature has to drop a little bit. If it doesn't drop, you can't, it's very hard to fall asleep.
Yeah.
And things like anything like serotonin, of course, and melatonin, these things very slightly lower your body temperature, but that in turn sets up a cascade in the brain. A bunch of molecules get involved where you actually fall asleep. So in other words, you always want to have a fairly, you don't want to sleep in a hot room. In other words,
yeah,
anybody at any age, it's going to be harder to fall asleep, not just because of the discomfort of the heat, because of that body temperature thing. Yeah.
I wonder if this is just melatonin's modulation of thyroid hormone or something like that, because I've noticed that when someone megadoses melatonin, they gain weight rapidly. It's incredible. I don't think you never tried it. I mean, I've taken 100 milligrams of melatonin.
Wow, that's a huge, holy cow.
Many times.
You do realize that the body produces melatonin
Less
in
than one.
microgram.
Yeah, micrograms.
Now think about that. Taking 1 milligram of supplemental melatonin is over 1,000 times more than your body.
How about this? Let me tell you this. There was one study of human ALS patients in which they gave them suppositories. That means rectal suppositories.
I know it is, yeah.
Of 100 milligrams of melatonin every night. And the metrics of oxidative stress in the ALS patients was totally erased.
Wow.
It was incredible. And I've seen also a study on Alzheimer's disease patients with 50 milligrams orally. Yeah. Also incredible results. Right. Melatonin has this weird thing where as it deals with reactive oxygen species through this cascade, it continues to neutralize species for like 6 or 7 steps. Well, and go ahead, please.
I was just going to say, there's an entire medical journal devoted to melatonin called the Journal of Pineal Research, an entire medical journal.
I didn't know that.
Devoted entirely to melatonin. That's how much, I mean, if you look at the research, it's incredible, basically underscoring what you're saying. The things that melatonin could do are mind-boggling. I mean, it even affects athletic injuries. I mean, it goes on and on. The only problem, again, is that it has that kind of relaxing effect. I mean, melatonin in larger amounts, you probably know, stimulates growth hormone, right?
Yeah.
And I've seen a blog, one guy was writing about taking melatonin, to stimulate, and I'm thinking to myself, the dosages he's talking about, I mean, you're going to want to fall asleep. You're not going to want to go to the gym. I mean, what's the point of taking a large dose and then falling asleep or going to the gym and like your workout? I mean, to me, I said to myself, this guy obviously doesn't work out too much, or you know the problem there,
People get really obsessed, I've noticed, with testosterone and growth hormone, and they want to do anything to manipulate these by like 5% or 10%.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
But actually, what I've noticed, it's quite odd. So basically, because of melatonin's ability to cross the blood-brain barrier very easily, and then several steps of reactive oxygen species neutralization, I started experimenting with mega dosing it. And what I found actually is that the main problem is that our body naturally produces micrograms. So if you take a high enough of a dose, even if it's short release, you still have a tiny amount in the morning, which is what a normal person would have had at night anyway. Right. So it can really interfere with your circadian rhythms.
Yeah.
It is tremendous. Like if you do it just right. So what I found is most people can, for example, eventually tolerate around 20 milligrams of short release at night. Right. And you do it right, I've noticed the incredible feeling of rejuvenation the next morning. I think having to do with this, dealing with neural inflammation in the brain.
Yeah. The most of it, what I take melatonin regularly, because I have a sleep problem. What I do is I take a 3 milligram time release. And now the reason for that, and I'm sure you're also aware of this, when you take melatonin orally, most of it is broken down in the liver. I mean, and even if it does get in the body, it's rapidly metabolized. It doesn't last very long. You're talking about maybe 2 hours at the most. So I'm hoping that this, but between me and you, this time release melatonin is supposed to last 6 to 7 hours. And I've taken it alone just to check where, I didn't take any other sleep supplements. And I found that it only lasted 2 hours, just like the regular melatonin.
So what I've noticed, this is very interesting. What I've noticed is when people take the timed release, they often wake up after like 2 hours or so.
That's exactly right. That's what I found.
Which is very bizarre. I don't really understand the mechanism.
I'm not sure. The only thing I can think of is it's some sort of pharmacokinetic abnormality. I don't know what it is. Obviously, the melatonin is being broken down much more rapidly than it should be.
Which is weird because the studies do show that the levels with the extended release tend to last like 4 or 5 hours or so.
I know. It doesn't make any sense. I know. I can't figure it out either.
It's very mysterious.
I'll tell you a funny thing, though, kind of similar. I have asthma, and for years, the standard asthma drug was theophylline, an oral tablet. They discontinued it. It fell out of popularity maybe 25 years ago because theophylline in some people it tended to stimulate the heart, and they were worried about that, because a lot of people walk around with a occult heart disease and this and that. So I never had any problem with it ever. But There was one thing that was funny. I used to take a time-release theophylline that was supposed to last 12 hours. And one time I had to go to the emergency room because I had an asthma attack that I couldn't control. And they happened to do a check. They did a blood test. And, they told me, they asked me what I had taken. I said, well, right before the asthma attack, about an hour before, I took a 12-hour theophylline. So the doctor looked, he said, that's kind of funny. I said, what do you mean? He says, you had no theophylline at all in your blood. He said it was metabolized almost immediately. And I couldn't figure that out. I said, how is that possible? And then I did some research and I found something interesting. People on high protein diets cause changes in certain liver enzymes, some of which metabolize theophylline. So and I was taking in a lot of protein at the time. So what happened is my high protein diet kind of, set these enzymes into motion that broke down the theophylline much, much faster than normally would. And I'm wondering if maybe this happens with the melatonin too,
That's really fascinating. I've never heard of anything like that.
Another example, there's research about coffee or caffeine, how they have fast metabolism, slow metabolism. Some people, for years, people have talked about, well, I can't take coffee. You've heard this. It makes me jittery and blah, blah, blah. And, you always wondered about that. And other people can have like 8 cups of coffee and hardly feel it, especially, chronic caffeine drink, coffee drink, because the body kind of gets used to it, And I wondered about that. And then they came out with the research showing, again, because of certain genes, some people metabolize caffeine. And those people that are slow metabolizers, if they take several cups of coffee, instead of being broken down at a normal rate, it accumulates, and they get almost like a semi-caffeine overdose.
That's true. And you know what's interesting? I read a meta-analysis in the last 3 or 4 years of the effects of caffeine on cardiovascular disease. That was quite interesting. It showed that there was not an association between the slow or fast metabolizers and CBD, which I found really surprising. I would have thought, they would have more impact, the slow metabolism.
Yeah, you would think so, would you? Because of the, the catecholamine release and all that.
I'll tell you another funny thing. I take an SSRI, actually to prevent dementia mainly. I know this seems like
Which one do you take?
I take fluvoxamine, which is called Luvox sometimes. So fluvoxamine tremendously impedes some of my CYP enzymes so that I can't digest coffee very easily. So oh my God, I think I'm about 20 times more, 20 times more sensitive or so. I mean, I've read research of fluvoxamine on caffeine. It's more than 20 times. It's ridiculous. So I can drink like a sip of coffee in the morning. That's it. I don't even drink an espresso. I drink a sip.
Wow.
It lasts me like 3 days, the espresso. I drink it every morning.
And you say you're taking this to prevent the onset of dementia?
Mainly, yeah.
Are you worried about that at your age already?
No. I don't think I don't know how effective it would be at preventing it if I was worried about like it coming soon. But the main reason, well, I mean, I ended up using SSRIs for a short period of time historically for anxiety, and then later I learned about their effects on neurogenesis and how this could affect the anxiety thing. And because of the effect on neurogenesis, I realized that in the long term, it's both a performance enhancer as well as a preventative thing for performance enhancing in the sense that it gives you a very flexible mind.
Okay.
Because your mind is constantly plastic. You can really feel the effects, especially, it makes you feel a little bit younger. I don't know if you ever tried one.
No, I have not.
Yeah, but tremendously impedes the metabolism. Jerry, I wanted to ask you something. This week I had an interview. So I have 2 people following my very small, because it's new channel, 2 people that have hepatocellular carcinoma, both former steroid users, both believe it to be due to their steroid use. And I had the pleasure to interview one of them on my channel this week. I wanted to ask you, in your, you're one of the most, one of the most experienced people in the world of bodybuilding, and you would have heard historically if this was common. Have you ever heard of people getting liver cancer in the world of bodybuilding?
Oh yeah. Absolutely.
Oh, you have it?
Yeah, I have.
Oh wow.
It's admittedly rare, but it happens. Most of the cases in the medical literature, if you check, were people that historically years ago, Anadrol 50. Can't remember the generic name. You probably would know it more. I can't remember.
Oh, the oxymethylone.
Oxymethylone.
Yeah.
That was a standard treatment for something called Fanconi anemia.
Yeah.
And they gave it to a lot of hospital patients. Now, here's the thing. we both know Anadrol is one of the more powerful oral anabolic steroids. Nobody argues that, right? But see, these people stayed on the drug for 6, 7, 8 years, and those people had a fairly high percentage of liver cancer. They traced it to the long-term use. You know, the way it works with the steroids is a lot of it, and this goes for anything in pharmacology, a lot depends on time and dosage and which drugs you use. Certain drugs are more associated with causing liver tumors. One of them is Anadrol 50. The other one is, oh God, I can't remember the name of it. It starts with an F. I can't remember. But these things are more liver toxic. Let's just say a broad category. The more liver toxic oral steroids, those are the ones that have the greater risk of liver cancer. That being said, however, in my experience, I have never personally met a bodybuilder who got liver cancer, and I've seen bodybuilders who've used some huge doses of orals, but you know, they all had one thing in common. I never knew any of them who stayed on it for that length of time, you know, year after year. And you know, the liver is very regenerative. You know, you could take away 3/4 of the liver, and it, you know, it can regenerate. You know, a lot of people don't know that. So I'm guessing that the liver, especially if they build up the glutathione, the endogenous, you know, let's say the toxicants of the liver, maybe take in some cruciferous vegetables to stimulate the phase 1, phase 2 enzyme. I'm thinking that that's basically more or less cleans out the liver, allows them to go on without liver cancer. But there is the possibility, again, if you use the liver toxic orals, if you stay on large doses, and I don't know why anyone in their right mind would do that, like take 100 milligrams a day of Anadrol for a year or two. I'm going to make an assumption. If you take a bodybuilder, you put him on Anadrol 50 at a dose of 100 milligrams a day, every day for a year, he's going to start showing adenomas in the liver. I can almost guarantee it.
I think that's very accurate. You know,
Yeah.
Jay, I read this meta-analysis or review by some clinicians about Fanconi's anemia and non-Fanconi's anemia, reviewing the historical incidence of hepatocellular carcinoma as well as adenomas from steroid use. And basically the conclusion was that it's surprising. They found some liver cancers coming from injectable steroids as well.
Oh, yeah, that's possible, sure.
Yeah, so apparently it seems like the more androgenic the molecule was and the longer the residence time in the liver, the more likelihood.
Exactly, that's right. But you know what the funny thing about injectables, I did an article on my Applied Metabolic newsletter. There's a general, a kind of a old wives' tale among bodybuilders and athletes that injectables are much safer than orals. Mm-hmm. Now, that is true to a certain extent. It's true because the orals, as you know, they're molecularly designed not to break down in the liver, so they accumulate and they cause an inflammation, cholestasis, et cetera, et cetera. But the idea that injectables are benign is insane. I mean, I've seen videos of so-called steroid gurus, whatever they want to call themselves, where they say, you could take any, I got an argument with one guy about this, young kid, about 25. He was telling people that you could take any amount of decadorablin and not have any side effects because it's injectable and it bypasses the liver.
It's also toxic to most cells, it seems, in the body.
Exactly. If you look at the animal research, it actually has caused liver cancer, all kinds of problems.
Every organ, yeah.
I said this to the guy. I said that, and you know what he says? He says, well, I've worked with hundreds of athletes. None of them ever had any problem even taking 2,000 milligrams a week of decadorablin or more. This guy advocates like 4,000 insane dosages. Yeah.
Oh, I think I know who you're talking about. Okay, that's very interesting.
He's a young, and after a while, I stopped. I had to delete him because the guy wouldn't. I even sent him some studies, you know, and he, you know, all right, they were animal studies, right? But this thing is, all of them involve decadorablin. As you said, you've probably seen these. They cause various problems. And the guy says, well, they're animal studies. I said, that's true. You know, they may or may not apply. But I think it's kind of a red flag.
You should tell him I'm Jerry Brainum. I'm the person that doesn't trust animal studies, but I'm trying to tell you there's something going on.
I agreed with him when he said
that. Yeah, you don't like rodent studies anyway.
I don't like animals because they're not, you know, there's too much emphasis placed on them. And, you know, there's only a 50% transfer to humans. But the point is, they do give you an indication of what could possibly happen. It's not die hard, but it's fun. And the fact that there was so many studies, with rats and so on, showing that decadronabin could be toxic in large amounts or taken for too extended times, that told me that I wouldn't mess with this if I had any kind of brain in my head. I would, the guy wouldn't accept it. I stopped. I couldn't take it anymore,
Which is really interesting. Many people who look at these studies don't realize, like a lot of bodybuilders I notice, they think that deca is a like a notoriously toxic compound, but they don't realize that it's just the most studied of the, they're not that studied. It's deca and then stanozolol and then oxymethylone and then that's it, sort of.
Right.
So
well, look at another steroid that is, I think you'll agree, is far more toxic than decadronabin, Trenbolone.
Well, one of the two people actually who has hepatocellular carcinoma never used orals. He used Trenbolone for about 5 years straight and then developed.
Well, I'm not a bit surprised because there is some literature linking Trenbolone with the appearance of liver tumors. It's in the literature.
Yeah.
But the thing is, there isn't a lot of material in the medical literature about Trenbolone compared to deca and some of the others.
Exactly.
But that doesn't mean that it's safer. I personally think that, I think we talked about this before. If I were an athlete, I would never touch Trenbolone for one reason alone, because again, I admit it's animal studies. They show in animal study that Trenbolone tends to stimulate beta amyloid and possibly even tau in the brain, setting you up for future. All right, they're only animal studies, but that scared because I have a fear of dementia. I wouldn't touch anything that's associated with that.
By the way, I have a really big fear of dementia. We could talk about this, separately some other time.
I'm right there with you. Trust me. And anything that even in an animal study, I won't touch. That's the way my mind works.
You know what? Can I tell you something? Recently, Lee Priest was on Dave Palumbo's show, and he was saying that, Alzheimer's disease can't be that bad. You forget what's going on. So, and I understand his thinking process, because when I was a kid, I used to think that too. I used to say, so what? If I don't remember, I don't remember. Yeah. But it's really, people don't realize that these diseases of the brain, they almost always come with extreme anxiety and depression, because a disease of the brain is a disease of the soul. So your whole being is being, deteriorating quickly. But on that topic, it's very interesting. I found a couple of studies showing that these steroids, like for example, Winstrol, these steroids can inhibit or increase the breakdown of acetylcholine or acetylcholinesterase in the brain.
Right.
So these things actually affect brain function quite a bit in really complicated ways.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I have some literature. I had it for over a year about the effects of steroids on the brain, which I plan to write. But, it's just extremely technical. And there's so many studies, I haven't had a chance to read it. But it's probably going to be in a future article. It definitely affects the brain in many surprising ways, by the way.
Yeah, very, very many. Yeah. So the main themes that I've noticed, I've not it's really hard to understand this literature, because there's an acute effect, right? So if you give a rodent, there's an acute effect, there's a chronic effect, and then the neurotransmitters in the brain, the systems, it's a little confusing. So you can see dopamine turnover can increase. You can see synthesis can change. So you don't know in the end, do you have more dopaminergic activity or less? It's a little confusing. But the things that I have seen is less serotonergic activity for sure, more a disconnection between the amygdala and the rest of the brain. And I think, but I haven't seen evidence for less GABAergic activity, but that's just from my personal experience.
As a matter of fact, it's funny that you say that, because years ago, when I found the relationship between steroids and I came up with my own theory. They had the thing about the roid rage was going strong back then. They have these people, their bodybuilders would take steroids and become crazy and kill people and crash cars. And I thought about it, and I said to myself, now, what is a neurotransmitter in the brain that can help control impulsive acts? And I said to myself, that would be serotonin and GABA. And I said to myself, what if you gave steroid users a serotonin precursor? So what I started to tell the bodybuilders is that when they take steroids, to take either tryptophan or 5-HTP, and you know what? It worked.
I thought I was new introducing this to people. I was telling people taking SSRI. You did it 30 years ago with that.
I did it 30 years ago.
Incredible.
And the funny thing is, it was strictly on a hunch. There was no literature on it at the time. I just guessed it, and since then, it has been proven. I was ahead of the pack. But the thing is, I wanted to use them as guinea pigs. I mean, not to hurt them. I was really curious. So I had these guys. In the beginning, I had them taking like really large. I had them taking like 5-6 grams a day of tryptophan, and all throughout the day. And the problem was they were getting really tired. Some of them told me they wanted to sleep all the time. But the other one, I said, well, what about? I mean, you told me you get really angry when you. He says nothing. He says I can't even get angry anymore. One guy told me.
So I found like a sort of, this is my idea of a solution really, as one thing is an SSRI, obviously. And then I've noticed, so one thing I've noticed is really powerful is a beta blocker that passes the blood-brain barrier.
Right.
So, because I feel like there's so much of a sympathetic nervous drive when people are on a high steroid cycle that they need breaks. So sometimes like, maybe most people would take a beta blocker twice a day, but maybe they take it once a day. So they get actual just a recovery at night instead of being amped all the time. And then for more extreme cases, although you can't manipulate GABA very well pharmacologically because of addiction issues and stuff like that, you can like inhibit the reuptake of GABA, or you could use some of these anti-epileptic drugs that increase like GABA transmission in the brain, but don't produce withdrawals. There are some of these drugs.
Yeah.
So, but the thing I noticed, Jerry, when I was looking into liver cancer to have this guest on my show, is that when I was looking into treatments and just trying to learn more about it, and what I found is, I mean, it's very primitive, actually, surprisingly. There's very little that they can see. My grandmother died of liver cancer in the 90s. So when my grandmother died, I remember I was a young boy, but I had heard that it had metastasized and spread, and there was nothing they could do. And it seemed like, it seemed like a dead end. And then now, 20-something years later, this gentleman's going through a similar experience. He's taking sorafenib, which is basically a vascular endothelial growth factor inhibitor, so limiting angiogenesis toward the tumor. And other than that, there's very little you can do. The tumor's too big for the liver, and they can't resect it without it shrinking a little bit. So basically, the only treatment really right now is chemotherapeutic drugs that reduce the development of new blood vessels. So what I was realizing is that cancer research is surprisingly more primitive than I realized, at least in some cancers.
Yeah. But I think that woman, you looked at the video. I think she mentioned that in her video. That I mean, she said some interesting things about, which I totally agree with. This idea of focusing on prevention rather than waiting to get it and expecting treatment to work, because the truth of the matter, oncologists, if they're really honest with you, with a lot of cancers, it's a hit-miss proposition. You know what I mean? In other words, an adage in oncology is that what was it? If the cancer, I'm trying to remember exactly, something about if it's something about if the cancer is in situ, if they get it where it's localized, where it hasn't spread yet, hasn't no it's 90% curable. But once a cancer has metastasized, it's just the opposite. It's only 10% curable and 90% not curable. Now, that was a couple of years ago. I don't know if that still holds true, but it probably does. This is why they're always emphasizing, you see all the ads about if you see, the 6 signs of cancer, always have this check, because the cancer is always best treatable when it's caught early. Any kind of cancer, right? Like I had a little thing on my nose, this little white thing on my nose last year, and I didn't even think that it could be cancer, but just for the hell of it, I went to a dermatologist, right? And it turned out to be squamous cell carcinoma, right?
Wow.
So I had 2 options, and one of them was hold on a second. Hold on, let me turn off this phone. Hold on a second.
No worries.
Hold on a second. Wait. Okay. Anyway, I had the option of the thing called mole surgery, where they basically, dig into the skin and they just dig it all out. Like, that's I mean, it sounds very primitive.
It's true. Yeah.
Wherever, the skin cancer is, they just Mohs surgery, it's MOH, and they dig it out. It leaves a tremendous amount of disfigurement.
Yeah.
I said to myself, well, there's got to be another option, Turns out there was a new radiation treatment out. And luckily, this dermatologist had just gotten it in her office, this machine. So basically, to make a long story short, I went through 6 weeks of treatment. I wasn't that familiar with this new treatment. So I did the research, and I found that the cure rate was comparable to Mohs surgery. In other words, I was concerned about a return. I didn't want to return, and it had the same rate. In other words, so I went through it. She did a biopsy. It was a funny story because before I underwent the treatment, she said, I'm just going to take a little bit of tissue. I said, is that going to leave any mark on my nose? She said, oh, maybe a little scratch. Well, it's still on my freaking nose. She took a fucking chunk out of the tip of my nose and never fully, I mean, people say to me, they don't notice it till I mention it, but I see it every day when I look in the mirror. There's a little gap right here on my nose from where she took for the tissue for biopsy.
You're surprisingly vain. I would have never expected that.
No,
you were annoyed about that.
Well, the thing is,
I would have been terrified. I would have said, "Take my nose off." I don't. Don't get.
No, but the thing is, a lot of people, they notice things right away. Like if you have bad teeth or you have like something on your nose, it draws their eye right away. You know what I mean? And you're right. I mean, if it came to living or dying, of course, it's a thing.
Or a weird mole. That's really what draws people's attention.
Yeah, a weird mole. Well, I thought about this guy, Robert Kennedy, not the famous Robert. This is the guy who Muscle Mag. What's it called? Muscle Mag International. He was a bodybuilding publisher. It's a photographer. Yeah, he got a squamous cell on his head. He was bald on the top, and he didn't treat it. And this guy was a multimillionaire. He could easily afford it. He lived up in Canada. He let it go for 30 years, and it wound up spreading. Eventually, it got into his lungs and his internal organs, and it killed him. He died.
Actually, you bring up an important point, which is I don't remember where this was. I think it was at an airport somewhere in the last few months, but I encountered someone at an airport or somewhere where I saw the back of his head, and he had I could tell that there was skin damage from the sun, but it didn't look cancerous, but it looked like severe damage. And I thought this guy might not know about it. He had basically his bald spot was severely skin damaged. Okay. So I tapped him on the shoulder and I told him, hey, be careful. You might want to get your head checked up because you can't see it, but you might be developing cancer there. Right. I don't know if this guy didn't see it or he didn't have a wife or something to tell him, hey, by the way, that's the problem.
Well, you might have I had that because I have a little bald spot back there. I used to, I put my hand there and feel these little nodules, and it turned out they were what they call actinic keratosis, which is precancer. In other words, it's not cancer, but it's precancer. And luckily, they never turned into cancer. I showed again, on a routine visit to a dermatologist. I said, "Take a look at this." She said, "It's actinic keratosis, just like I thought," and she basically froze them off, so it never turned into cancer. Wow. But in other words, you make a valid point there. People, today you have a lot of guys shaving their heads and walking around. These guys have to be careful because the head exposed like that to the sun, they can get these actinic keratosis very easily. And they will turn into cancer, so they should actually put, sunblock on their head when they go out in the sun. I mean, it's tremendous ultraviolet radiation there. Or wear a hat like you wear, something like that,
That's very true. Hey, Jerry, a week ago or so, Joe Rogan had a guest on his podcast who's one of the main speakers for the carnivore diet. I forgot the guy's name exactly, but he's pretty well known. Right. And, he went on a 20-minute segment where he was just talking about the dangers of plants in terms of the toxin.
Yeah.
But I'm not making fun of him. But I mean, genuinely, he was really talking about the serious danger that plants pose to our life and our health and the need to avoid them. And then, Joe Rogan, because he's had Rhonda Patrick on a couple of times, he said, but I've heard there's this thing called hormesis where we recognize some of the phytochemicals and our body responds to this toxin in a net positive way. Right. And so the gentleman who was with him said, this is sort of true. And there is environmental hormesis, like being out in the sun or exercising or going to the sauna. And he thinks that's great. But he says he thinks that molecular hormesis, where you have a phytochemical that's signaling to your body, is not as good because it causes damage. Even though it's a net positive, it causes damage in the short term. Do you think that so two questions. First of all, do you think there's a serious danger coming from phytochemicals that are hormetic? And second, do you think that hormesis is that valuable as a compared to, for example, dealing with free radicals? Like when you approach foods, like some people will be looking at getting vitamin C to deal with free radicals. Other people will be looking at raising their glutathione by taking sulforaphane or something.
I think hormesis definitely, is real. Well, let's look at an example of the sulforaphane, which I'm sure you're familiar. Minder Patrick is big on that, right?
Yeah.
Sulforaphane, people don't realize it's actually a kind of a toxin. And because of that, it stimulates the phase 2 enzymes in the liver. And by doing, you have the phase 1 and phase 2 detoxification system. Phase 1 could take things that you breathe in or eat and make them more cancerous. But the phase 2 neutralizes that. So they kind of work together. See what I'm saying? Now, the sulforaphane, because it's a kind of a toxic effect, the way the liver works, it stimulates very powerfully the phase 2 enzymes. By doing that, it works against other toxins that could be carcinogen, see? But the truth of the matter is that, and this is true, sulforaphane, if you were to take massive amounts, you might go to, again, getting back to hormesis, you might go past the point of safety and efficacy and start to have problems. Yes, there's a certain amount of truth to that, in other words. But I don't think most people get to that. And of course, there's always the goitrogen effect of these cruciferous vegetables. I think most experts will agree are the healthiest of all vegetables in terms of what they do in the body or what they're capable of. But, they do have things in it that block iodine uptake, but there's always ways around that. I mean, when I first learned that, I just said to myself, okay, let's assume that it does have a goitrogen. I said, what's the effect? It turns out the effect is that it blocks iodine uptake, right?
Yeah.
I said, okay, what happens if you take a iodine supplement at a different time? Voila, case closed, no problem. It's that simple. In other words,
whereas
in other words, what you have to do, and see, you're an analytical guy, so you think more or less a little bit like me. You would look into the mechanisms and say, okay, there's a possibility of toxicity, but can I do something that'll neutralize that toxicity, allowing me to get the benefits imparted by this, let's say, plant, whatever, sulforaphane?
Yeah.
But you have to say, a lot of people, most people are not willing to do that. I mean, they'll listen to a guy like this talking about, plants being toxic. Oh, I'm going to go live on meat and come complete because plants are dangerous. They don't understand it is a hormesis effect. Up to a certain point, they're very healthy for you. I mean, I will say that I think a lot of the benefits, I mean, you see these vegan advocates, some of them, like this doctor, what's his name? You know him, he does a lot of videos.
Dr. Gregor.
Yeah. What's his name?
Gregor.
Very smart guy, and I like his videos. I mean, he does a good job, but he's like militant vegan. And
he's religious. He's religious. That's how I say it.
Right, but if you believe what he says, some of his videos, I'm sure you've seen, where he talks about like the hidden toxins in meat and this, that. I mean, if you believe this guy, you would say that just like the carnivore guy, you would say the opposite. He's the opposite. He's on the other end of the spectrum. He would say all animal protein foods will shorten your life, and they're dangerous, and they're responsible just about every degenerative disease from cardiovascular to dementia. You know what I mean? So what is the truth? The truth is right in between those guys.
Yeah.
Meaning that, living on plants alone can present problems. You know what I mean? I mean, the most common is just, even dummies know this. You're not going to get certain nutrients in vegetables if you're a vegan. B12, iron, omega-3 preformed, this, that. I mean, if you don't do a little bit of research, you don't have to study it like you and I do, but you have to know the basics. You have to know the antidotes, if you want to call it. How can I eat a vegan diet and stay healthy? Here's the supplements I have to take. If you don't do that, you're going to be in trouble. It's worse than a carnivore diet, because I have met, maybe you have too, I have met especially women who went on vegan diets. They didn't bother to do the research. They didn't supplement the diet. I got stuff like they got anemic. Some of them got, so weak they could barely walk. A famous example, Angela Jolie. She went on a vegan diet. She said, "I'd never felt that bad in my life." That was her exact words. In other words, she went down to something like 80 pounds, this and that. She was already skinny. So, I guarantee you, she did not supplement, she didn't bother. I mean, someone as wealthy as her, you think she consults somebody, with some expertise. What do I need to do to? She didn't. She just ate vegetables and fruit, and she wound up getting screwed up. You know what I mean? So, I mean, there's problems with the carnivore. I did an article just recently in my Applied Metabolic Science about, is the carnivore diet sustainable long term? In other words, you know, some of these people, I got the idea because I saw a couple of videos where people said, you could stay on this the rest of your life. You never need to worry about vegetable or fruit. And I said to myself, I'm going to research that and see if it's true. And my conclusion, and this is in the article, I explained in detail why, is, you know, theoretically you could, like, you know, the famous thing about that, what was his name? Amundsen, remember the explorer who shut himself in a Bellevue in 1929 and lived exclusively on meat and water for a year. You know about that?
No, I don't actually. I'm going to read about that. That's
okay, there was an explorer, Arctic explorer, Roald. I can't remember. Yeah. Anyway, he decided to, you know, the Inuit people, so-called Eskimos. He noticed that they basically lived on meat and blubber, and there was no vegetables or anything like that. Yeah. So he decided to do the same thing and see what would happen, because they seemed to be pretty healthy. And him and his associate basically lived on the diet. Now, he did it wrong at first because for some reason he started out living only on fish, and he got very sick. He got what they call rabbit sickness. I don't know why they call it rabbit sickness, but what happened is, it turns out if you eat a lot of protein and don't have any fat, it actually is a toxic effect on the liver.
Oh, interesting.
So I don't know how he realized it. He was a fairly smart guy. Instead, he started eating the meat. You know, the meat. He kept the fish, but started eating meat. And of course, the meat has fat. He was fine. And he went back and he writes these articles about how, you know, it's perfectly. This, by the way, you could say this guy's the father of the carnivore diet.
Oh, are you talking about the guy who created that large organization that's sort of, they're not carnivore, but they're like into primal eating and stuff like that?
No, that's Weston Price.
Yeah, Weston Price. Yeah, okay, no. Okay.
This is a guy even before that. He goes back to the 20s. So he comes back and he starts going to all these science meetings, talking about how he lived on this diet. Nobody believes him, because you can't live on meat alone. You know, even back then they didn't believe it, right? So he volunteers, him and his associate, go voluntarily put themselves in a ward at Bellevue Hospital in New York for 1 year under the constant supervision and monitoring of physicians. And he lives on meat and water. I'm not sure if he ate fish or not, but he basically the same diet for 1 year. Now, the doctors expected him to at least have scurvy, vitamin C, because where's the vitamin C in meat? Well, it turns out that meat has tiny amounts of vitamin C, and you only need 10 milligrams of vitamin C to prevent scurvy. So he was getting about 20 milligrams a day, which is not a good amount of vitamin C, but he was getting enough to prevent scurvy. At the end of the year, the guy showed, him and his associate dropped out. He couldn't take it, but he stayed on it for a year, showed no vitamin and mineral deficiencies whatsoever. And this was written up, I think it was in the New England Journal of Medicine, you know, or Lancet, I can't remember which one. But that, believe it or not, is the entire basis. Now, getting back to my article, I had a whole section about this guy. I talked in detail about the experiment. But here's my conclusion. You could probably live on a carnivore diet for a long time, but if you're looking for maximal health and protection against disease, not a good idea, because you're missing all the polyphenol, the flavonoids, the flavone, all the things that are not found in meat, you're not going to get. And I mean, some people still debate this because of the absorption problems. You know, the intestinal bacteria has to convert, blah, 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 blah. But I believe, based on the research, that these things do offer a pretty good amount of protection. I've seen a lot of studies where people eat a lot of flavonoids, for example, in the Netherlands, much less incidence of strokes and heart disease. So let's say the benefit of that will say that these things are protective. So I concluded that, yeah, you could stay on a carnivore diet for a long time, but if you're interested in maximum health, not a good idea, because sooner or later you're gonna be more prone to getting, you know, the carnivore people argue this. They say bullshit. They say because you're eliminating sugar, you're eliminating all these bad things, you know, the toxins in vegetables, that it kind of evens out and you'll still stay healthy. I disagree. I think those things are really helpful, and knocking them out of your diet completely is not a good. If you're interested, I mean, if you don't care, if you don't want to be maximally healthy, if you just want to be lean or this and that, okay, then you could stay on it. I mean, in the article I pointed out, I was a carnivore myself, and when I competed in bodybuilding shows, I literally my first diets were meat and water. I lived on
tuna and water, huh?
Meat and water, and then after about 4 weeks, I throw in eggs. My entire diet for 4 months, up to 6 months, was meat and eggs. Nothing else.
Wow.
Nothing. That's all I ate, and I lost every drop of body fat. My skin was so thin I couldn't even grab anything on my weight. There was nothing left. I was just pure muscle, right? And I felt like shit in the beginning. I had what they call them today the keto flu. I didn't know what it was at the time, and I didn't know how simple it was to cure that, which is simply to eat more sodium.
Yeah.
Sodium and potassium basically cures it. I didn't know that. Back then we thought that sodium held water. And no sodium. We took away from it, But the thing is, it worked, and I have to admit, after the first, let's say, 5 weeks when I got keto adopted, I felt fine. But I've said this in my articles, I still felt it in my workouts. Without carbohydrates, and I think I might have told you this. Let's say I did 3 sets of an exercise. On the first set, I was strong. Second set, a little bit weaker. Third set, nothing. Weight, I can get 12 reps on the first set. Second set, 8. Third set, I'd struggle to get 4 to 5. Same exercise, and that was for the lack of glycogen. That's
other people in that like, is this the 70s we're talking about here?
Yes.
Were other people then eating this kind of like carnivore diet for competition?
Yeah, everybody was.
No way. This is so interesting.
There was exception. Arnold Schwarzenegger was a notable exception. He never went on that diet. Arnold would eat the same foods. All he did is cut back on the calories. He did basically a low-calorie diet. In other words, he did cut back sugars a bit, but he never went on zero carbs, never went on low carbs. All he did is reduce the size of his meals. That's it. That was his diet.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
And you bring up Gregor. He's such an interesting character because Gregor produces such high quality videos and such high quality presentation as well as information and great.
I agree.
It's wonderful. And he, of course, has a team of research assistants that produce this for him. But he's
did you know that he has about 30 people working for him?
Yes, they're huge. They're huge. Yeah. That's
just the other day I saw something where I got an email where he says he's hiring new people. So anyway,
they're growing. I mean, there's people like me and you who just read papers individually, and then there's people. Even Rhonda Patrick has a bunch of employees.
I didn't know that.
Oh, Rhonda has employees. She doesn't like all her comments on her YouTube are managed by someone else, one of her employees. She doesn't, and she has people researching for. Peter Atia is currently hiring as well in San Diego. He's hiring several employees. He's making a much bigger team. Everyone has a team, but anyway. So Gregor,
except me.
Yeah, except you, and now me as well. I have no.
Just real fast. There's a nutrition newsletter that I'm a subscriber to. They gave me a lifetime subscription, which is nice, But I mean, it's not bad. Don't get me wrong. But every day, when I get it, they list their staff. Listen, Leo, they have 25 people putting that thing together. They got researchers, they got editors, they got graphic design. And I'm thinking to myself, I got one guy, me. And I'm up against 25 people, you know what I mean? I just thought it was kind of funny.
What ends up happening, this is the interesting element, like this is a bit off topic, but when you're just one person, you end up developing an economies of scale kind of thing in your brain where because you've done so, you're not specialized at all. So you can interrelate all of the different information you learn and you can produce work that other people can't, including PhDs, which are too specialized to be able to.
That's a very good point. Very good point. That particular newsletter, and again, I'm not saying it's bad. It's a beautiful, just like Gregor, they have the money to do nice graphics. It's a very good looking newsletter. But they charge 3 times as much as my newsletter. And I know this doesn't sound objective. I would say, that my newsletter, each issue has like 20 times or 30 times more information.
No, your newsletter is very underpriced. It is very underpriced. Yeah. I really, really recommend everyone who's listening to this to buy it.
And I'll tell you why. Are we taping one?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And I'll tell you why. There's a reason why. Because guys like you can appreciate this. I go into extreme depth. I explain everything. They don't do that. They do a superficial explanation. You know what I mean? And, you know, they do have...
Your articles are a joy. For someone that doesn't have a background, you go in within one, usually every month you produce 4 or 5 articles, but every article, it's not like it's extremely long and too detailed that it bogs you down. You know, obviously we talked about this on a previous podcast, but you have a great way of writing science writing in a way that everyone can appreciate. And so you enter an article with no background, you end the article completely understanding the subject, having, you know what I mean?
That's my goal. See, that's my goal. I don't want to get people mired down in heavy technical terms. You know, I can go into all the molecular pathways and, you know, and almost all the research I read, they do that. And I say to myself, I am not going to put this in. What I will do is give a general overview without going, you know, PPY, X, this and that. You know, that turns people off who aren't into the head. A guy like you would say, okay, you would appreciate that. Unfortunately, and I would. But the majority of people, it just makes their eyes cross and they don't want to read it.
No, but I still appreciate your kind of writing because that takes real talent and a real, you know, it's very difficult.
I know this sounds funny, but when I first started writing, this is going to sound weird. I learned from established writing experts that, you know, and I was writing for magazines. They said, if you want to write thoroughly or write an article that people will really read, you have to act like you're writing for people in the 6th grade. I know it sounds funny, but what they were trying to say is you have to make it simple enough where you'll keep people's interest. Otherwise, their attention goes somewhere else. If you throw too much stuff at them at once, they will stop reading. So what I try and do is I write for the reader. I don't write for myself. If I wrote for myself or you, a guy like you, it would be much more technical. But again, it would turn off, unfortunately, about 80% or more of the readers. So I always have to keep in mind. And I'm telling you, you know, even my topics, when I search for, when I come up with ideas, I always ask myself, how many people would be interested in learning about this?
Yeah.
I'm interested. Some of this stuff is esoteric stuff that you would be interested in, like, you know, really research that nobody really knows about. But would it interest a guy in the street? Because he's going to say, all right, how does this affect me?
Your stuff is very practical. I always notice that.
You know, see,
that's my only complaint personally, but, you know, I'm different from everyone else. But yours is very practical. Like,
in other words, like the thing is that I say to myself, what can they use this today? You know, can they use this in their lives? And is it, like you said, practical value? That's my rule. It has to be practical. I have rejected some of those, what I thought was some of those interesting stuff. I mean, mind-boggling stuff, but a lot of it, for example, was not here yet. Like, you know, when we were talking about that stuff, remember you told me to look up that, what was it, ERBs? What was it? Remember you suggested this new line of research. I can't remember the last time we talked.
I don't know.
It was, anyway, it was a new line of research that only people heavily rooted in science or read science like you would know about.
Yeah.
And you know, and I looked into it like you suggested, and I agree with you. It's tremendous value. Unfortunately, it's not here yet. It's kind of further up the line. So, you know, as far as my news, I say to myself, why would I write about something that nobody can use right now? That's not really good. Although in some articles at the end, I will say, in the future, there will be blah, 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 blah. In other words, I won't leave it out, but I won't go into detail because it's not practical right now.
Yeah, you do that.
That's the way I do it.
Jerry, can I ask you something? When you were, say now looking back, say you could go back to, say like 31 or 32 years old, or say after you started writing,
you
got into writing and got into the science of it, maintained your interest that you had from college when you were interested in pre-med, and say you could go back right now, would you go back and get a PhD to give yourself a professionalization or potentially to go into an academic career? Or do you think that being a generalist and being able to interact with the papers in different spheres has given you a perspective that is unique and was really valuable and worth not having that, you know, PhD and academic, you know?
Well, based on all the years of writing and research I've done, if I hadn't done all these years of writing and research, I probably would say, I would have gone back and gotten an advanced degree, a PhD, or even an MD. But now, based on what I do and all the research I do, I don't really think it's necessary. You know, because I think that it depends on the individual. You know, if I wanted to actually work as an MD, of course I'd have to do that. But I mean, for years, I always regretted not going to medical school, and I thought I made a terrible mistake. But my attitude has changed over the years. Like just the other day, I went to my doctor, and he was saying, he says, I've turned into just a glorified clerk. I said, what do you mean? He said, everything, and he was typing, everything's paperwork. I do more paperwork than treatment of patients. And I've heard that from a lot of other doctors. And I say to myself, that's not for me. I'd be bored silly doing that stuff, I mean, so, I mean, the only advantage, honestly, to answer your question, it would probably give me a little more credibility.
That's all I'm talking about.
In other words, I have had people under my videos say, without knowing anything about me, they'll say, why would you listen to this guy? They don't even know my background. He has no advanced degrees. He says, listen to the people with PhDs and MD. This guy knows nothing.
Which, by the way, Jerry, I want to tell you something funny about that. There are a bunch of people on YouTube that have the name doctor that I recently found out they're not even doctors. Like Dr. Eric Berg, he's a very famous health guy. He's a chiropractor.
Right.
He's giving people advice on medicines all the time and food.
Listen, Leo, there's a lot of people on YouTube who call themselves doctor who are chiropractors, or they're things like naturopaths.
Yeah.
And I'm not putting down naturopaths, but a naturopath is not on the same level as a guy who went through medical school.
But the people who are watching it literally don't know. They think that the person's an MD, and they'll be like, hey, doctor, thank you so much for this medical advice. I'm going to go put it into use.
Right. Well, a lot of people even criticize osteopathic DOs.
Yeah.
They see that is a little bit wrong because DOs actually go through a very similar medical curriculum. The only thing is they specialize in more of like, the manipulation of the body and this, that. They're kind of in between a chiropractor and an MD is the best way to describe it.
Mm-hmm.
But I consider them real doctors. But there's a lot of fakes. of fakes. In fact, I'll tell you a funny story. The Gold's Gym training books that were published years ago, they're still around, some of them. You can, buy them on Amazon or something. The owner of Gold's Gym at the time was a guy named Kent Sprague, right? And I was just starting I was writing courses back then, bodybuilding courses for guys. And he approached me and he wanted me to write the original Gold's Gym training books, right? And he said to me, Jerry, what degree do you have? I said, well, I have a bachelor's degree. He says, no, you got to get a PhD. I said, well, Ken, I don't really, I have the money or the time to go back to school for 5 years and get a PhD, He says, don't worry about it. I'll buy one from it. I said, what? He says they got these mail order schools where you could purchase a PhD, right? He says, I'm telling you, Jerry, he says, if you write Jerry Brainum PhD, the books will sell twice as much because people put these doctorates, they are on pedestals. They think that if you have a PhD or an MD, you must know everything. You're a knowledgeable guy. And I thought about it for a second. I said to myself, because I wanted the job, to be honest with you, I really wanted a job. And I said to myself, you know what? One of these days, if I do this is going to blow up on me. A guy like Leo will research me and find out that I have a fake PhD, and I'm so fucking embarrassed. I didn't want to risk it, so I turned it down. And he got a guy named Bill Reynolds, who was one of the editors at the Weed magazine, to write the books. And that's a true story. That's why, because
Thank God you didn't.
I didn't want to deceive people. And I wrote something on Facebook. I just reposted a couple of years ago. I was talking about how some of these pretentious assholes, they always, if they have the advanced degree, I'm talking real ones, they will write Leo Rex, PhD, everywhere they write.
How about this? How about this? The more going on.
If they send you a Merry Christmas card, Leo Rex, PhD. What the fuck do you have to put?
No, Jerry, that's nothing. It's the guy who says, Jerry, that's nothing. It's the guy who says doctor, period, Leo Rex, comma, PhD. That's the one.
You know what the funny thing is? They think they're so smart, but that's simple. That's a simple English.
It doesn't make sense. How could you be doctor, PhD?
It's like saying I'm gonna take money out of the automatic teller machine. In other words, they don't realize that ATM stands for automatic teller machine.
Exactly. So repeating it twice.
Yet these are the people who try and hit you on the face with how smart they are. I'm not saying they're all like that.
How about this, Jerry? The worst one is also the guy who writes a comma and then MSc. That one kills me. That's like, you got a 1-year master's degree and you want to tell me about that? Or often the MSc guy will also have a BSc right after it.
Yeah.
Become MSc, BSc.
I've seen guys that put like 8 fucking degrees after their name. But the thing is, it's one thing if you're writing a technical paper, but if you're writing just casual stuff, that is so freaking pretentious.
Well, everyone knows. The more prolific an academic is, the less often he puts that comma PhD. They don't do it.
The words right out of mouth, because the smartest people I've met who had real degree, I'm talking Harvard, some of these top guys, they don't even on their technical papers, they don't even put their degrees. You have to read their biographies to see the degree. I mean, they say, okay, I got it, big deal. I'm not going to hit you over the head with it. That's a smart guy. You don't try and impress people by constantly beating them over the head. I'm a PhD. I'm a MD,
But also, so Jerry, like in terms of your writing, obviously the PhD would mainly have given you credibility, which unfortunately there are these people who like to,
it would.
That element. But then it would have taken 4 or 5 years out of your time.
That's right.
To make you specialize completely in one subject.
That's right.
Which would have, limited your reading. Like basically what you do all the time is just read academic papers. Like you're a professor, basically reading, but you read in whatever topic you want. So you have the flexibility to develop a unique outlook. Yeah. Whereas PhD doesn't. They're so specialized. So don't you think it would have been a bit of a waste of your time in a way?
In a way, yeah. And also, another point that you're making here, these guys tend to be more rigid based on their academic training. In other words, they stick to what they've learned. I'll give you an example. A lot of these guys with PhDs always issue a statement. You've probably seen this. It's impossible to get fat from eating carbohydrate. Now, if you look in the textbooks of biochemistry, it says that the de novo synthesis or lipogenesis is minimal from carbohydrate intake. Now they're talking about the liver at the site of the liver. That's true. That is true, right? But then they take it further, where they say that you just can't get fat eating carbohydrate because your liver will oxidize all the excess carbs. Yeah. Now, all you have to do is look around at people who eat all this sugar. They're fat as a house, and the liver is clearly not oxidizing all those carbs, right? And yet, because it says that in the textbooks and they were taught that in school, they refute. They will, even when the evidence is right in front of their face, they'll still stick to what they learned. This is extreme rigidity, and this is what I didn't want to get into, and what I'm not into, where I do have much more open mind. I always say, and I've said this to a lot of people, if I write something or say something, and you can prove that I'm wrong with evidence, solid evidence, I will change my opinion. I will. I'm flexible. This is a problem I have with the people. I don't want to get political, but the people that support Trump. I have a problem with them because no matter how much solid evidence you present to them, they will reject it. They'll use expressions like fake news, or people are against Donald Trump. He's trying to help people. And then I say to them, oh, fine, okay, tell me exactly what has Trump done for you? Well, he's built the wall. Actually, he's built 5 miles of wall, and he repaired 250 miles that were already up. Next question. Well, he saved me a lot of taxes. Oh, so you make over $500,000 a year? No, I don't. You know how much taxes you've saved? $2,000 in 1 year. I said, is that going to really make a big? And I go on and on. Now, you would think by the end of this discussion, they would say, you're right. I never realized this. This guy really is a jerk. I'm not. But instead, they say they reject it. It's what is that expression in psychology where you're so rigid in your thinking you refuse to. I can't remember.
What's funny? I actually was specialized in this subject in my master's degree, and I always forget the names of the biases. There's the heuristics and biases approach of Tversky and Kahneman.
Confirmation biases, I think it might be.
There's confirmation. There's a time preference bias. There's tons. There's like 30 or 40. Yeah.
But the point is that.
By the way, Tversky, who invented those biases, was my master's degree's advisor's advisor. He was my grand advisor. He's a Nobel Prize winner. Yeah. Great. Anyway, continue. Sorry to interrupt you.
Well, that's a top guy. But anyway, the point is that, in other words, I don't like the type of thinking where if you present solid evidence,
people
that's
stick to the theory instead of recognizing empirical evidence or
another pet peeve is not accepting science. Like this thing about climate change or this and that.
By the way, on that topic, did you notice that? Sorry to interrupt you, but I'm getting excited. Did you notice at the first debate that whenever they ask the Republicans about climate change, I noticed this, they actually dodged the question.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting. So the Democratic Party's guy, like Biden, when he's asked about the Black Lives Matter stuff,
Yeah.
or to denounce them, he dodged the question.
Right.
But you can tell it's not that he's supporting the violence, it's just that part of the people who support him are supporting it. So he can't directly go against it. And then you see Trump was the same thing with the climate change. Like he won't directly, because there are people who truly do not believe in climate change that are following him. Yeah, it's very interesting to see when you have only a two-party system. Yeah.
But you see, with the Republicans, there's an ulterior motive for the not talking about
economic motive. Yeah.
Yeah, an economic motive, because a lot of the people that send them money, what is it? I forgot what it's called, the term, but
lobbyists.
Yeah, lobbyists. These are oil and gas industries where if a lot of the
fracking, especially,
yeah, exactly. A lot of the suggested ways to reduce climate change would adversely affect those industries, and that's money coming to these politicians. So they'll never. In other words, what I'm trying to say is, I believe if you were to take them aside and say, "Listen, Senator, between you and me, do you really think that there's no such thing?" The guy would say, "Yeah, there is, but I can't say it publicly."
Yeah, exactly. I know.
These guys are giving me $1 million a year. I can't come out and say it. You know what I mean? Because a lot of these guys, they don't impress me as being idiots, so stupid.
No. But you can't think there's no climate change. I was thinking that too. I was watching. I was like, you're just this shameless. You're just ignoring the question.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, you have a guy like Lindsey Graham who, on camera 4 years ago, says you could use this. Keep this tape. I don't think that a outgoing president should be allowed to appoint a supreme. It should be up to the next one.
Yeah, I know.
And then he goes against his own. How could you show your face? I'm embarrassed for the guy.
That was
God. Yeah. Talk about no integrity. Jeez.
Yeah, but you can't trust. The truth is, all these who wants to be a politician? See, sometimes you have true believers like Che Guevara, these kind of people who truly believe in political values or that they can cause real change.
Yeah.
And then you have everybody else who's sort of a person that is driven to power and driven to controlling people. And it just brings the worst kind of people. At the end of the day, I don't really trust anyone. Yeah.
I think it's a power thing. I agree with you. I mean, it's just like a policeman. I always say to myself, who would want to be a policeman? I mean, you put your life in danger, I mean, what's it? You get a good pension. Like here in California, when policemen retire, thanks to a Governor Gray a couple of years ago, they get, you won't believe this, they get 90% of their highest paid a year, highest salary year. They get that for life. And they get free medical for the rest of their life, right? So there's definitely
90%. That's
80% of the highest paid year for life. Wow. For life. This is why California is always running out of money. Firemen and firefighters get a similar package. But my point being that I say to myself,
it attracts people who are bullied, I think, in high school or want.
Again, you took the words. I was going to say it takes a certain. And again, I'm not putting down.
Not all of them, but
not all of them. Not all of them. Some of them just like the job. That's fine, But the point is, a lot of people that become policemen have a power thing. You know what I mean? They like you say, they were bullies when they were kids. They like to control people. Unfortunately, this comes to the fore when you have situations like you see where they're shooting dogs, shooting black people. This is the mentality involved, that I have complete power. I can do what the fuck I want because I'm a policeman. You know what I mean? It's a certain type of mentality.
That there's no question, just knowing it ourselves, growing up through life. Like, did you have any friends in high school that became policemen? I did. Yeah. Very rarely.
Yeah, I knew one guy. His name was Ira. He was a training partner of Lou Ferrigno, of all people.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he came out here and became an LAPD cop, and he died a couple of years ago. Ira was not like that.
Oh, really? Yeah.
He became a cop. Never really asked him why. I think it was because of the benefits. He liked the benefits of the cop, and it was a solid job. Once you went through the academy, you did your job. You got your paycheck, and you got your benefits. And that's what he wanted. So that was his reason for it wasn't to control people. That's the way a lot of cops are. That's their mindset. You know.
Jerry, I'm trying to reduce my podcast length, so I think maybe we should end sometime soon, but get you back sooner instead of having long breaks where you don't come in. So we can do, but I have one last question for you.
Yeah.
I'm curious, have you noticed in your experience in bodybuilding that in the strength sports and in bodybuilding, there is an unusual amount of conservative people compared to the normal populace? Like, do you notice, for example, in bodybuilding, Republicans or the Republican Party is more favored than the Democratic Party, and there are more conservative bodybuilders than liberal bodybuilders? Or do you notice that?
I do notice it, and I'll tell you how I notice it on Facebook. I was surprised. A lot of famous bodybuilders are on my friend list. They're unabashedly supporting Trump, and I'm shocked.
Yeah.
You know, because these guys never impressed me as being stupid. I mean, one guy I got a little thing the other day. He's a good friend of mine. I don't want to mention his name. He was a former Mr. Olympia. He insists that I always mispronounce it.
Hydroxychloroquine.
I always call it hydroxyquinone. Hydroxychloroquine is an effective drug. He says, I have female friends that have been taking it for 10 years. It's safe. You know, they have lupus. And I pointed out, I said, but you don't understand. It works differently. There's been about at least 7-10 studies showing that it's ineffective for treating COVID-19. I said, and when you have COVID-19 and you take it, it doesn't do the same thing in the body. In other words, these people are more prone to having heart problems. And when they take the dosage of hydroxychloroquine, that can, maybe help a little bit. They unfortunately are more prone to cardiac arrhythmias. And it went right over his head. He just kept saying, well, I know doctors, and I just didn't want to, I like the guy, so I didn't want to, get into where I'm insulting him or anything. But, you see this a lot.
I heard you're quite active on Facebook. You're developing a little bit of a notorious reputation in the last year.
I just can't stand ignorance and stupidity. I mean, there was one guy the other day who was a Trump supporter. He had his long post about all the great things Trump had done. And I'm thinking, my God, he got this wrong. And I was tempted to just, copy his post, not answer him, copy it, and go, sentence by sentence of why he was wrong. And I said to myself, what's the point? You know what I mean? You're not going to ever convince, the Trump, the way things are now, Trump supporters are cultists. They're in the same mindset as the Jim Jones people that drank the Kool-Aid down in, what was it, Guyana years ago? I mean, they would literally do anything Trump says, and anything. Conversely, anything Trump says or does, anything is complete. I mean, you don't believe me? Go to YouTube and watch them interview. There was a guy was interviewing Trump supporters outside one of his rally. He says to this woman, he says, "What if Trump said he could shoot 5 people and it wouldn't affect his supporters? Do you agree with that?" She says, "Yes." He says. Trump said, you're a woman. Trump says he said some very disrespectful things about grabbing women's genitals. And how does that affect? It just doesn't bother me a bit, she says.
There's a lot of it doesn't bother me.
She says, what if Trump killed his whole family? Would you still vote for him? I thought for sure she'd say, well, no. She says, I'd still vote for him. And I said, holy shit.
Jerry, I have a funny strategy for you to entertain yourself in the remaining days before the election. What I do is I'm subscribed to 2 channels on YouTube. Yeah. One is called David Pakman. Have you heard of him?
I watched him. He's good.
So David Pakman's great, and he's very interesting, and that's one perspective. The exact opposite is Tim Pool, who was on the Joe Rogan show. You may have heard of him before because he interrogated the Twitter CEO on the Joe Rogan show about censoring people, which was an excellent podcast.
I didn't see that, yeah.
So actually, Tim Pool is a traditional liberal. He's not really a conservative. He's actually a liberal, but he's sort of developed a niche where he represents sort of people who used to be liberal but are moving toward conservatism because of changes in the dynamics. So anyway, if every day you watch Tim Pool's videos and David Pakman's videos, it's completely crazy because they're completely opposite. And the funny thing is, if you listen to either of them, they're both intelligent people and they both sound rational. Right. So, but they're totally opposite views. And it's just so interesting.
Is this guy Tim Pool, is he a Trump supporter?
He is now a Trump supporter, but it wasn't until about 2 months ago or so. But he's very, very involved. He's not like crazy or anything. But it's very interesting every day to watch David Pakman and Tim Pool. It just makes you a little bit bipolar.
Yeah. I honestly, I try to be objective about it. I just don't understand why at this point in time, people still support Trump with all the lies, all the deceit. I just don't understand it. I mean, and he hasn't, if he had been a really great president and improved people's lives, I'd say, okay, the guy's a prick, he's a this and that, but he has been a good president. I understand why, but he hasn't. He's been a shit president. I mean, because of him, he got 211,000 because he ignored it. He, blah blah blah. I mean, he dismissed Obama's pandemic committee. Blah blah. He can go on and on. He's terrible. Why do they support him?
Do you think that he may win?
It's a possibility.
Yeah,
listen. Right, if you think back, right about this time of the year, it was exactly the same. Hillary had the same advantage over Trump, and it looked like a sure win. I mean, you couldn't bet against Hillary by that point. But but here's the thing. The thing is that that electoral college is tricky, and the thing is, if people get apathetic, and I've said this on Facebook, if they say, "Hey, it's a done deal for Biden," I don't have to vote. Fuck it, I'm not going to bother. Trump will win. You know why? Very simple reason. Every single Trump supporter, every one of them is going to vote. If they haven't already, they're going to vote. They are not. They're going to definitely. They will come out in droves. All the evangelicals, every one of them is going to vote for Trump. If the people that were on the fence, so to speak, in the last election, who weren't sure to vote, if they don't vote this time, or if people again get apathetic and say, "Well, Biden won anyway. Well, I don't need to vote." Trump will win. It can happen.
Hunter hasn't been doing them any favors either.
No. All right, that's
gentleman has been quite active in his life.
Well, all right, but you know what? It's still, you can't really hold that against.
No, it's not relevant. It's not, honestly, it's not relevant.
I mean, look
unless it's corruption.
Look at Trump's kids. They're about as corrupt as you can get.
But he's not doing them any favors. Like a couple of weeks before, they're like, "Oh my God, this son is a headache. This guy has so much. What are we gonna do with this guy?"
Yeah, I mean, he had a drug problem, and supposedly he's okay. I mean, I even thinking of he can't hold. And the stuff about Biden being senile and all that kind of crap. That's bullshit. I mean, all right, the guy's 77. He might be a little slow, right? But what people fail to realize, what they fail to realize is that the president is not an isolated individual. He has people all around him that are very sharp, and Biden will have that too. So even if he's a little slow, he's not. Look, Reagan was senile in his last 2 years of office. People didn't even know it.
Is that so?
Yeah, check it out.
I had no idea.
He already had Alzheimer's disease. He had the early stages, but he was very forgetful, and this and that. It came out later on, But the thing is that, you can't go by that. Biden, the old man. So what? Trump's 4 years younger, and look at Trump. This is a guy who can't pronounce fucking words. Come on, he's that much better. It's not like you're comparing a brain surgeon to a dummy. I think a break.
Yeah, but it's going to be very interesting. I'm having a lot of fun watching these two perspectives and seeing what's going on.
Wait, I tell you, before I got to tell you one thing real fast. There's one thing, and I asked myself this the other day. With Biden's tax plan, he says he's not going to raise taxes for anyone making under $400,000 a year. And I said to myself, now, how would I feel if I was a really wealthy guy making a lot of money? Would I still want Biden? And you know what? The funny thing is, I had to think about that for a minute. And I thought about all the unethical things that Trump has done, his nastiness, his cruelty. And I said, you know what? I'd still vote for Biden, even though it would cost me money, because Trump is that bad. I really believe that.
Well, Biden has a lot of support from billionaires.
Definitely. I know.
Yeah, it does. And it's really interesting how the world has changed in the sense that, in the 80s, the Republican Party was the capitalist party in the sense that companies used to support it. Right. Now, both parties are sort of supported by companies. Yeah. Both tech supports Democrats, and then, obviously more energy kind of stuff supports conservatives.
Yeah. I would say that the Republicans are still more of the, let's say, business-oriented in the sense that they are, again, like it goes back to the lobbyists and the payments, all that, they are more or less controlled by industry. In other words, their fealty or their loyalty is to their, let's say, industrial donors rather than to their constituents. That's the problem with the Republicans. In other words, they are more concerned with the people giving them money than the people that they're supposedly representing. That's my problem with the Republicans.
You know what's fascinating? I never thought of it this way before, but it could be looked at like this: the Republican Party seems to be having great issues criticizing Russia, and
Yeah,
the Democratic Party has almost a complete inability to criticize China. They cannot. Like a lot of them can't say anything. I don't know if you've seen these kind of weird stories where like the NFL jerseys, you can't write "Free Hong Kong" at the back of them. The website won't allow you to. Free Hong Kong has been like censored off so many American companies. You can't put on your clothing. So the Democrats can't talk negatively about China for some reason, I've noticed.
yeah,
And the Republicans also, even though like often the Republicans will be like, no, China is the problem. Okay, but why can't you criticize Russia either? So
yeah.
but it's a question now. Has the U.S. political parties become, like, are they working for foreign forces? I don't really know what's going on. Both of them, to be honest with you.
Well, with Trump, there's a definite Russian connection. It's still unclear, but I mean, like this 400 million or whatever that he owes, nobody knows who he owes it to. It could be the Russian oligarchs. I mean, and because Trump refuses to say, I mean, even that story about Putin putting bounties on the head of soldiers, and I think it was Afghanistan.
I heard of that.
I mean, any president would have been outraged. The worst president in history would have said something. Trump said, "I haven't seen any evidence that it's true." I mean, come on, seriously. I mean,
What do you think about the term that they've created called Trump derangement syndrome?
Oh, you mean about people who hate Trump?
Yeah, is there a syndrome that what is it? What do you think of it?
Well,
because people do develop an unusual amount of hatred for this guy. I mean,
well, I guess I have it. I admit it. But the thing is, my derangement syndrome is based entirely on fact, not on fake news. I base it on exactly. I knew about Trump for years, even before he was in politics.
Yeah.
Growing up in New York, I know what kind of guy he is. But the thing is, I warned people about not voting for him, but it didn't do any good. Although he lost big in New York, because New Yorkers know about it. But
yeah, that is a telltale sign.
The point being is that Trump, they came up with this Trump derangement syndrome as a opposition to Trump cultists. That's the term that guys like me use for Trump supporters. They're cultists because if you look at the definition of a cult, they have complete obedience to their leader. Again, the classic example is Jim Jones telling his people to drink the Kool-Aid. I mean, they will believe and do anything Trump tells them to. I mean, that's like an automaton. That's like
which, by the way, it's a little. Let me tell you, it's a little ironic that you mentioned Jim Jones, because Jim Jones was a socialist leftist who was extremely obsessed with racial equality. I don't know if you recall. Obsessed. That was his main concern, was black and white, equality. So that was his main driving. But anyway, Jerry, thank you so much for being with me. I really always enjoyed so much talking to you. I hope I can have you on sooner, and maybe we do shorter ones every so often.
Okay. That sounds good to me.
And the last thing I thought it may be worth mentioning on the podcast, rest in peace, Rick Drayson, because the first time we spoke since he passed.
Yeah,
and I'm sorry for your loss, really.
Yeah, he was a good friend of mine. I'm gonna miss Rick. He was a great guy. As you know, I did a couple of his shows with him. I didn't expect, he was a little bit sicker or more ill than I thought when I've since learned some of his medical problems. I knew he had, for example, one kidney. I knew he had some heart problems, but apparently it was a lot worse than I thought. That's what caught me by surprise. So, he was, 70s, how old was he, 74? I can't remember. But, he's a terrific guy. I knew the guy for 51 years. So, yeah.
He was so positive and full of energy. I used to watch his videos, just get happy.
He was really, he loved bodybuilding. He loved talking about it. I mean, he acted like almost like somebody's uncle. He'd say,
"Yeah,
I want you guys to do this and that." I mean, he was a nice guy, good guy.
So he had some heart problem that we didn't know about, other than
he had apparently. I don't know if it was set up. I know he had kidney failure. Sometimes you get this multi-organ failure where the kidneys fail, then the heart fails, and everything goes.
Because the kidney fails, then you go on the dialysis, then the heart fails.
Well, yeah, but unfortunately, I was told something. I told by somebody who apparently has some inside information. I found this out just recently. I was told that Rick was offered, his kidney was failing, and the doctors wanted to put him on dialysis, and he turned them down.
Wow.
Which, I hope that turns out to be maybe not true, because that would have saved his life. And that'd be tragic if it's true, because his kidneys failed. I know that. Yeah, not kidney, one kidney. He needed to go on and supposedly he turned it down. I don't know why.
Had he already replaced his kidneys before?
No, I don't know what happened. I never really, all I know is he had one kidney. I'm not sure whether he was born that way or what, but I know he had one kidney, but I mean, I wish that I could have been in contact with him and I'd known that, because he listened to me. He respected me in that way. And if he would have said to me, Jerry, they want to put me on dialysis, I don't know if I should do that. I said, Rick, do it. Because he told me I had a huge accumulation of fluid, edema in the legs, which is a sign of kidney failure or heart failure. And I would have said, Rick, please go on to dialysis, please. He might have listened to me. He might still be alive. Again, this is speculation. I don't know. It might have been something completely different. I don't know. I'm only going by what this one guy told me,
You know what the beautiful thing, though, I feel like at the end of all of this is that Rick has been, obviously Rick is already immortalized for so many other reasons, but just in the last few years of his life, he's immortalized in video in a way that is, really unique, that we didn't really have that. Like, I can sit right now, obviously I don't know Rick that well, but if I miss Rick, I could go watch a video of his. I could watch videos of his for a week straight without putting a pause on it.
I'll tell you an interesting thing. Right after Rick passed, I don't know if you know Doug Brignoli. He's another friend of mine, Doug Brignoli. He's a kind of a bodybuilding champion who's a biomechanics. He wrote an excellent book called The Physics of Exercise. You might want to check it out. It's an excellent book on all the proper ways to do various things and why some of the more common bodybuilding exercises are completely wrong and lead to injuries, But anyway, Doug Brignoli was kind of on his show a lot, especially when I was on. And after I stopped doing Rick's show, Doug continued to do it. And anyway, right after Rick died, Doug approached Rick's children and suggested, why don't we keep Rick's show going? It was called Rick's Corner. I'll host it to keep the memory of Rick alive. And they vetoed it. And they said no. This is what Doug told me, because they just wanted to leave it as is for the reason you just said. His videos are going to stay up. And they think it was Rick's thing. Let's just leave it to Rick. And Doug understood. I understood. I understood their feelings. He was doing it because he liked Rick and was hoping, maybe to do it as he thought Rick might like that
in his memory. Yeah.
Right. But I understand their point also.
You know what's weird? When I used to operate a blog, and the reason why I started on YouTube was basically because no one reads anymore. So I gave up, I actually don't like to talk. I prefer to write. And so this is a bit awkward for me in general. But so one of the reasons that convinced me, because my friends were all telling me you should open a YouTube channel, for a long time, for a couple of years. In the end, when I ended up deciding to do it, one of the factors that made me do it was this idea that I'm immortalizing myself on video. So, because I would have loved to have videos of, for example, my grandfather or my father, even when he was younger, to see how.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure. So hopefully that's, one a silver lining of all of this.
By the way, I hope you're wrong about everyone not reading. Otherwise, I'm in big trouble with my.
No. You have people that I think that are dedicated to you. I was just starting out, a couple of years ago. But thank you so much, Jerry. Hey, we'll talk. So I'll email you soon so we can schedule another one and we continue, because I have so many more things to discuss.
Always a pleasure to talk to you, Leo.
The pleasure is all mine, really, Jerry. Thank you so much.